Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns from the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, Doug and I team up to have a conversation with a leader in the field, a sitting college president or chancellor, or someone who we think that you should be listening to. And that is definitely the case this week. We have a fantastic president for you. Our hope is that you will distill a sense of their perspective, their leadership, a little bit of their wisdom. That's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
And before we introduce our guest this week, I just want to remind you that we're brought to you, and this were made possible by Mainstay, which some of you may remember as AdmitHub, which it used to be. It's a student engagement and retention platform, and among the things that distinguish it is that it really it's got real proof behind it in terms of peer-reviewed research. And there are some peer-reviewed studies that show that it helped Georgia State reduce summer melt by 21%, and it helped it retain, the same university, Georgia State, retain 1,200 students. So check out Mainstay at mainstay.com, and you'll see why we appreciate them as a sponsor. And want to now welcome this week's guest, who's Kate Smith. She's the president of Rio Salado College, which is part of the Maricopa Community College District. And she's been in and around higher education for 30 years, but been president at Maricopa since, at Rio Salado for about 7 years. So welcome, Kate. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doug and Bridget. I'm thrilled to be here and to get some time with you too.
Well, we're excited. I like how Doug also gave you a promotion in the intro, which is great. So let's start there. In terms of 30-year career, you've really distinguished yourself as a leader in the community college space. But for folks at home who don't know your background, I'm just curious, how'd you get here, and did you ever expect to end up being in a position, being a college president?
Bridget, I never, ever expected to be a college president. I honestly, from the time I was very young, all I ever wanted to do was teach. I thought teaching was the greatest career ever. I just think the teaching learning process is incredibly engaging and challenging, and it's the end all for me. So that's all I ever wanted to do was teach. And I just kind of accidentally fell into administrative positions along the way. And so ending up as a college president, probably nobody's more surprised than me that this is where my career actually took me. I love teaching. I spent 15 years in the classroom at a community college back in upstate New York, in Rochester, New York. And actually, I always like to say I kind of grew up professionally at Monroe Community College in Rochester.
There are obviously presidents who, I don't think there are a lot who dress up as a college president for Halloween and when they're 6, but there are a lot of people who do sort of view that as a goal. But I think there are plenty of sort of accidental administrators, at least. And I'm just curious, sort of, now that you as having made that leap, what are the ways in which you view the presidency of a place like Rio Salado, which is obviously its main product is the teaching and learning. You don't do a ton of research. So you presumably believe that you are enhancing and supporting teaching and learning right now. But like, how do you view the change and the moving into that role as in embracing and enhancing teaching and learning still?
Yeah. So Doug, first of all, it's a huge honor, right, to be able to serve in community colleges, period. It's a gift. Every day I still view it as a gift. Every day I was in the classroom. The fact that people are willing to trust you, to open themselves up to learning and growing, and that is in itself an honor. I guess I see in the role of the presidency the ability to influence opportunity for so many who have not had opportunity or have had so many barriers to opportunity, that is a huge honor in the role of the president. We are so laser focused on creating those socioeconomic pathways and figuring out what are the barriers that keep people. And we know higher ed, post-secondary education is the gateway to. So what are the barriers that are keeping people out of higher education, right? And so to me, that that journey of having been a teacher for so long, having been a professor, honestly, it really helps every day in the presidency because I just think I know my students, right? I remember their stories. I remember their faces. I remember what they were going through. I remember how much I admired every single one for what they were doing and how they were doing it and how they were, overcoming whatever barriers were in their way. And the beauty of the learning that happens among classmates, right? So it's not just the content they're learning, but in community college, they are learning, that classroom, that learning experience is so diverse in who comes into a classroom at the same time. They were learning so much all the time. So being a college president, really being able to just have influence to keep working at how do we remove barriers? How do we innovate to meet the needs of today's learners? That's just a huge honor.
I also went to community college. So I'm a big fan. We're kind of a ragtag group. Doug and I. Doug went to a fancy school. He has fancy pants. I started out scrappy at a community college, public school kid. But big fan of the work that you do. I'm curious about as we shift a little bit into you as a leader. How did you even learn about like leadership? I think most of us have someone who we saw as a model. And I'm curious about who you learned the most about leadership from. And was that a good example you wanted to replicate? Or I've also seen some folks learn about leadership because they're like, man, I'm not going to do what that person does. So I'm just curious about how you learned to be a leader.
So that's a packed question. It's a great question. And obviously, being in this role, it's something I've had to reflect on quite a bit. And if I'm truly honest with you, I learned the very most about leadership from being a teacher and from my students. Learning how to meet people where they're at, learning how to understand how someone is hearing what you're saying, learning, how to bring a very diverse group of thinkers and ways of being together to form a community for greater outcomes. All of that I truly learned in the classroom from my students and how to do that. In terms of leaders, I've probably learned more from watching and wanting to emulate really good, strong leaders. But you learn also some very powerful lessons from the leaders that you want to make sure you don't emulate what they do. Yeah, there's those moments where you're like, wow, okay, make sure never go there as a leader. But definitely, I would say in terms of, yeah, learning to be a leader, it's so much more of having been able to work alongside or work under some really great, phenomenal people.
That's great.
You used the word strong before, and I'm curious if I don't know if you just meant good or if you meant forceful, but how do you think? I mean, how would you define yourself as a leader, and how which elements of your leadership do you think are most what adjectives would you apply to your own leadership that you think are most important?
Um, Interesting question. I'll give you a brief story about one component of having strength as a leader. Um, I remember early in my career, there was a dean at the time where I was working. The big issue was going on, and I said, there's going to be these big open forums, and we were talking about them, and I was going to voice, my thoughts, and she's like, well, if you say those things, be prepared, you'll be the only one standing there. And I looked at her, I'm like, no, that's not true. There's just, dozens and dozens of people are having the same conversation. They feel very strongly on this issue. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, lots of people have the same opinion and viewpoint. And she said, trust me, you're going to be the only one standing there. And sure enough, this open forum, dozens and dozens of people, buzz everywhere, all over talking about this issue. The only one who stood up and said something. And that was a lesson that was so powerful for me that you just have to be prepared when you believe in something, when you're strong on something, whatever it is. You may have to stand alone, and that takes a lot of strength. And sometimes you might be afraid, and you have to do it anyway, right? Because you know that what you're standing for, whatever you're navigating for, whatever the outcome is, whatever the goal is, having the strength to stand up and hold on to, whether it's a certain issue or whether it's a vision, but being able to stand in the midst of others not willing to stand up when you know it's what's best for students, you just do that. So I would say strength is a word that I use, Doug, because I think it takes a lot of inner strength to be a leader. It takes a lot of inner strength to hear the criticisms, to invite the criticisms, honestly, um, because you want to make sure you're really always being thoughtful and attentive and hearing and listening to all of your constituents, right? That's your students and your learners, of course. It's all your employees, it's your community. And so you really are always inviting all those voices. And sometimes those voices are hard to hear. Sometimes they're critical. Sometimes they're harsh in what they're sharing back with you. So I think it takes a lot of inner strength. I would say passion is a word I use every day as a leader. If you don't wake up with that kind of fire inside of you to make a difference, right? Like, to be doing work that matters for our learners and our communities, and building thriving families and thriving communities. It would be hard to be a leader. Why would you do it if you're not waking up with that passion, right? So I would say definitely strength, definitely passion. And then I would say deep, deep caring. Like, you really passionately care about people, about people's lived experiences, about how they learn, how they grow, about how we can care for each other. And just really, when you care so much about what you're doing, you do it with better and better excellence. Oh,
Mhm.
and then I'd also say reflection. Yeah, leadership takes a ton of reflection. You need to be able to reflect, not beat yourself up on over every little thing, but learn, right? Like, ooh, that didn't go so well. Ooh. Let me make a note not to do that one again.
I am curious, so I want to go with another question, but what happened at the end of that story? I think people at home are going to be like, wait, so you're left standing, you're the only one speaking up. Do you experience the thing where everyone comes up and whispers afterward, I'm so glad you did that. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Do you lose your job? Like, where I think we're going to be.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a great question. Thank you for that, closing it out. I did not lose my job. I did experience the lots of people sending emails or stopping me in the hallway. Oh, I'm so glad you said something. And me having to fight back saying, yeah, and why didn't you? I was younger in my career, learning, growing. And then I was asked to be the leader over the whole thing, right? Because because you were the one who's willing to be strong enough to stand up and say what needed to be said. And even though administration at the time didn't agree, they still asked me to then be the person to take on leadership for this entire, new area that was happening.
Was this the case, because we do this in higher ed, where the person who's brave enough to call out a problem means you're now the problem owner. You're now you are the proud parent of the biggest challenge that no one was even willing to admit we had. An actual thing.
Yeah, it was. Sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
No. I was trying to. It was a role overseeing something, but you articulated the need. Okay. But we do that.
Yes.
We do that. You're the person who said we have a problem, so now you're the parent of that problem, which is a real problem.
Right.
Because then people not want to speak up. Super interesting.
Yes.
So I did want to ask about what I feel like you've kind of touched on this, but I'm wondering if there might be something else. What has been the most surprising element of your career? Has there been a particularly surprising element?
The most surprising is simply that I'm a college president. I there's no way around that. Never in a million years would I have ever thought this is where my career would go. Um, so that's probably hands down, yeah, the most surprising element.
Makes sense.
I guess sorry, I'm just I mean, I spend a lot of my day surprised that people are wanting these jobs right now because it's so hard. Um, and were you wrong to think so? I mean, in other words, I assume you're glad to be in the role now. And what is it about? I mean,
Mm,
I guess what
yeah.
was it that deterred you? Because I imagine there are probably a lot of people out there who might be thinking the same thing. And if what's your sense of why if you were wrong then, or if you're what has changed your mind? What changed your mind, and why are you glad you did it?
Yeah, so my what changed my mind was just my experience, right? So I ended up coming out to Arizona, becoming a vice president, and that really was one of those moments where I had to follow that, that voice inside of you that really keeps telling you you should go do this. You should do this, even though it was so not what I wanted to do. moving to Arizona was not on my radar screen, right? Um, but the college, Rio Salado College, and I were just a match. There's no other way to describe it. Like it was just the right fit. And when I got here, I knew it. I felt it. It's just been, I mean, I just love my college. I love everything about this place. And it's so different and innovative and all of that. And, but then I would never have applied to be a president. Um, I just there was some upheaval that happened at the college, and so I was asked to step in as the interim president, and I knew that I was the right person for that moment because of some of the culture work that was in front of us and some of the healing that needed to happen in front of us that I just knew that that was the moment that I was there for, but that turned into 3 years as an interim president. So by then, kind of doing the job, right? And so then I've continued in the role. Uh, why would I even maybe what would I tell other people? Absolutely, uh, absolutely. Being a president of a college is a wonderful, incredible career, and I would recommend it, but understand some of the costs associated with it, right? So just know kind of the time that you're going to have to give to this type of role. So you go into it informed, right? Know that it's a personal cost, right? Leadership today is tough. It takes a personal toll on you. There's a lot of nights you're going to go home and it's hard. It's hard. There's hard situations you deal with. There's heartbreaking situations you deal with. There's frustrating moments. Um, just at an elevated level. Uh, but but the opportunity for influence, the opportunity to speak into decisions being made at either a local, state, or national level that can help give voice to people whose voices aren't getting heard in those spaces. Wow. Like wow. Do it. Do the job because it's needed, right? Those voices are needed. It's just so fundamentally important. And I know I'm going to start jumping up and down soon. Sorry. um, it's so important that we have people who are willing to listen to their students, their learners, their communities, and give voice to those voices that aren't heard at those bigger levels.
Well, we agree with you. That's big part of the reason behind the show is there's this illusion of this like cardboard cutout of what the president should be like. And that is not a realistic picture. And it's also not the leader that we need these days, not to navigate the uncertainty, the complexity, and frankly, the level of candor that people want to see from leadership in higher ed. And so we need leaders who are different, who think different, who look different, who are different than the prior approach. Because, and I'm just mainly also worried about the amount of turnover and just how high the cost is for the role. That, you know, looking nationally, that's a lot of people who, like, we need strong leaders, and we need this to be a job that people want and can stay in. So anyways, that's what we're trying to spotlight, leaders like you. So I will say, I wanted to ask you to build on what you've just talked about. What do you think is the change that is most needed from higher ed in this moment, given you've indicated some of the just of how challenging it is right now?
So on the workforce side, I would say the change, you know, all of higher education, one could argue, is about workforce development, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the people who go through higher education then go into a workforce. But I would say, as the world is changing so quickly, and as the speed of technology is changing so quickly, higher education needs to be able to respond with much more rapidly and with much more flexibility. And it's so interconnected, right, with legislation, with industry partners, all of it. It's all very interconnected. So, you know, this is a very high level response to some very complex issues. But that is a change that is needed from higher education. Um, you know, when we look at the, you know, depending on who you cite and which source you cite, the 35, 36, 38 million, you know, adults with some college but no degree, um, those without, you know, without a high school education, you know, we have hundreds, you know, over 500,000 just in our state alone. Um, the work We need to be able to make higher education more accessible in a way that helps, I believe, support some of those short-term learning that, you know, we call them micro credentials, certificates, however you want to refer to that work, but the shorter term chunking of the learning to help people get into the workforce, meet the needs in the workforce, meet the needs of their own, you know, family sustaining wages. Um, and we just have to be able to respond much quicker. You know, you look at World Economic Forum, right? And they're talking about, you know, within 5 years, more than 50% of all jobs will need reskilling, upskilling, et cetera. Higher education should be that partner, right, in that space, so that every industry doesn't have to become, you know, an education institution within itself alongside of being whatever their business is. So that's a big one I think needed right now. Um, I think our continued work in really building understanding, helping our learners all grow understanding of how to interact, how to disagree in really positive ways, why that's helpful actually in society, as a, you know, and trying to debunk some of this, you know, some of the polarization that we're experiencing as a society. I think that renewed attention to that in higher education is really important. Um, and I'll stop there.
Well, I think
I could
those
keep
are some good marching orders. I think you're touching on some of the important themes that we talk about, Doug writes about, and we're definitely hearing about. So appreciate that. Well, in our last few minutes with you, we wanted to also surface the advice that has been most valuable to you in your career. And I'm wondering if there's any one particular piece of advice that someone gave you once that you find yourself reflecting on, or that made the most profound change. I'd love to hear what that is.
Well, this one's a little, I don't know that this is the most profound one, but it's one I reflect on a lot in this role. And a colleague had said to me, you know, we need to take the arrows in the back and keep moving forward. And as leaders, staying focused on what is keeping our students and our learners primary, why this matters, keeping laser focused there to keep moving forward. no matter what some of the challenges and the hurdles and the arrows are that might come at you. I find that in this role, it's just a powerful image of how to just keep going. I'd also say, advice around quieting that inner critic. So there's a lot of us out there who really struggle with, kind of beating ourselves up and feeling like, oh, I don't know, I shouldn't have done that, and we spend time there just, criticizing ourselves in a way that we would never criticize another human being. And so kind of learning how to quiet that, learn from those moments, but quiet that down so you can keep doing what matters, which is what matters for your students, what matters for your employees, what matters for your community. I would say those are some pretty potent pieces of advice in today's world.
Those are great. Is there a book that has been for you, like a leadership book that you most frequently recommend to others? I didn't want to not ask that, just in case you have anything that you use in your back pocket when you're.
I mean, if I'm honest with you, I actually don't, but there's reasons why. If somebody asked me, I would say first make sure you're reading about emotional intelligence and growing your emotional intelligence as a leader, because I think we're at a time where that's we just need to help people remember how important growing their emotional intelligence is, and then obviously Sandy Shugart's work and the leadership in the crucible of work, and I think that's a really great book for really talking through how to be an authentic leader, how to be yourself as a leader, because otherwise you're not going to be as effective, right? And again, I go back to the classroom. It's the same thing as a teacher, right? Students smell a teacher who's not authentically themselves and they want nothing to do with it. And I think that's the same in leadership is, being comfortable with how to be authentic in this role when there's so many demands and so many forces telling you all kinds of things. How to stay true to being authentically yourself. And then Bridget, I just want to say for those who are thinking about leadership, the advice I always give people is be a yes person. Say yes to opportunities. Don't overthink every opportunity because you don't think you're quite prepared for it. Like, just say yes. You'll learn, you'll grow, you'll get there. I think working hard, being a hard worker and saying yes to opportunities is really just opens doors that you never even wanted to open, but but they're great doors, right? And there's great things you can do as a leader, and you have gifts to give, you have talents to share, and you have a voice that's needed in this world. So so that's my advice.
Well, that is a perfect way to end the day. And I feel like we're all very pumped up and inspired. You're very inspiring. Lovely.
Go.
Thank you so much for on behalf of us and our audience. So thank you so much. It's been really lovely and getting to know you. And Doug, thanks for being an excellent co-host. And for those of you at home, we will see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you so much.